Next, debate from the House floor on a resolution requiring the Justice Department to turn over documents related to the Russia investigation. This is just over an hour and a half.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the purposes of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, pending which I'll yield myself as much time as I may consume. During consideration of this resolution, all time is yielded for the purposes of debate only. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on House Resolution 971 under current consideration.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning. This morning I am pleased to bring forward the rule on behalf of the Rules Committee. The rule provides for consideration of House Resolution 970, which insists that the Department of Justice comply with the request of the Judiciary and Intelligence Committees. The rule provides for 1 hour debate, equally divided between the Chairman and Ranking Member of the Judiciary Committee. Yesterday, the Rules Committee had the opportunity to hear from Congressman Jim Jordan and a fellow Judiciary Committee member, as well as Ranking Member Jerrold Nadler. Also heard from Congressman Mark Meadows and also Congressman Scott Perry, engaged in a vigorous discussion that lasted a while in Rules yesterday. Mr. Speaker, oversight of the executive branch is one of the House's most important responsibilities and authorities. As a member of the Judiciary Committee, which has oversight of the Department of Justice and the FBI, is a responsibility that I take very seriously. I believe the administration has an obligation to comply with the committees of jurisdiction's legitimate oversight requests and subpoenas. Unfortunately, the Department of Justice has not fully complied with numerous of these requests, many of these which stretch back several months. To illustrate this, let me lay out a timeline for you. On November 3rd, 2017, Chairman Goodlatte and Chairman Gowdy, along with additional members, sent a letter to Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein requesting 5 specific categories of documents. The deadline listed in the letter was November the 17th, 2017. That deadline was not met. On December 12, 2017, Chairman Goodlatte and Chairman Gowdy and additional members sent a letter reiterating the expectation that the Department of Justice provide the requested documents. The deadline listed in that letter was December the 19th, 2017. Again, the deadline arrived, and again, the deadline was not met. On February 1st, 2018, Chairman Goodlatte sent a 3rd letter requesting documents related to potential abuses under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. On March 22nd, 2018, the Judiciary Committee issued a subpoena to Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, compelling him to produce documents and communications referring to internal DOJ or FBI management requests to review, scrub, report on, or analyze any FISA collection involving the Trump campaign or the Trump administration. It has also compelled the production of communications relating to the defensive briefings provided by the DOJ or the FBI to the 2016 presidential campaigns of Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. Finally, it compelled production of all documents and communications referring to proposed, recommended, or actual FISA coverage on the Clinton Foundation or persons associated or in communication with the Clinton Foundation. The deadline for this subpoena was April 5th, 2018. The Department of Justice is in the process of complying with this subpoena, but complete compliance has not yet occurred. Mr. Speaker, I believe that in regard to the subpoena, the Department of Justice is trying to comply and in the process of doing so, but yet has not at this point. But also I share the frustration of my colleagues and the American people that this process is taking way too long, and we need the answers, we need transparency, and it is our duty to conduct oversight. The law charges us with shining light where government has fostered shadows instead of providing answers. The Department of Justice has a responsibility to produce these documents and is yet to make them available. The resolution provided for by this rule speaks to the core of our democracy, the inherent tension between the branches of government that our founders intended. Our responsibility as co-equal branch to act as a check upon the other branches. Could this debate not happen at a more appropriate time as we look toward even the 4th of July in their country's founding? This is why we were set up the way we were. The inherent tension has arisen most recently out of the Department of Justice's failure to comply with congressional oversight. Some of the documents this body seeks to relate to congressional inquiries that have extended almost the length of the 115th Congress. They deal with some of the most pressing issues of our government today. Has the Department of Justice abused its FISA authority? Was an investigation of national importance affected by bias? I believe that these investigations need to play out, but I also believe that they can't last forever. I also believe that the evidence of bias, a library of extremely troubling texts, key personnel removals at the FBI illustrate the heightened need for robust congressional oversight. As James Wilson, an architect of the Constitution and Associate Justice on the First Supreme Court, so eloquently stated, the House of Representatives formed the grand inquest of the state. They will diligently inquire into grievances arising both from men and things. As a member of the Judiciary Committee, I will continue to take that charge seriously. Yesterday, the Judiciary Committee considered a similar resolution. Today, the whole House has a chance to responsibly exercise its oversight responsibility and reiterate to the Department of Justice the need to fully comply with our legitimate request. It is important to note that the House Intelligence Committee has been similarly stymied by delays to requests for information and that certain documents have been provided to only select members of that committee. This resolution insists that the Department of Justice comply with the request, including subpoenas of these committees, one of which I proudly serve on, so that the American people can get answers and we can exercise our proper constitutional duties. The American people demanded answers, and that's why Congress, representatives of the American people who answer to the American people, are demanding that the DOJ answer to us. Let this also serve as a reminder to the Department of Justice that the U.S. Congress was created by our founders and its authority and responsibilities arise directly from Article 1 of the United States Constitution. The Department of Justice, on the other hand, was created by Congress. Its powers arises from those given to it by Congress. And it is just as those powers are given by Congress, it's Congress's responsibility to ensure that they are not abused. And if necessary, it is Congress's responsibility to limit those powers. Woodrow Wilson, who was among the first to use the term oversight in reference to the investigation of the executive branch, stated, "Quite as important as legislation is the vigilant oversight of the administration." Today, we show that we are taking oversight of the executive branch seriously, particularly the Department of Justice, and we are working to prevent bias in the government. We demand accountability because the American people have deserved no less. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Georgia reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, for the customary 30 minutes. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection, so ordered. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I hardly know where to begin. With all this going on in the country and in the world, we have children being ripped apart from their families at the border. We have Republicans working with the White House trying to take away health care protections for the American people. We have a president who seems unhinged. With all that's happening, this is what we're dealing with here, today on the House floor this morning. Basically a resolution to try to undermine the Mueller investigation, which is investigating potential Russian involvement and collusion in our election. That's a big deal. We should all want to get to the bottom of this. We should all want the truth. And instead of wanting to get to the truth, my Republican friends throw roadblocks in the way, one after another, to try to get people to try to discredit the investigation, to try to derail the investigation. It is unbelievable to me. The president this morning tweeted, "Russia continues to insist they had nothing to do with meddling in our election." I can't believe the President of the United States is tweeting that. What's wrong with him? Every single intelligence agency in our government says the Russians meddled in our election. And we have the President of the United States this morning tweeting that Russia says they didn't do it, so we got to believe Russia. I don't know how my friends can defend this. At some point you have to say enough. I get it, the Republicans want to constantly circle the wagons around the president, with every outrageous thing he says and does. But this is about a foreign power and adversary meddling in our elections. And what's the response? Let's try to disparage the investigation. Let's try to undermine the investigation. It is unreal that we're going through this exercise today, but I guess we've come to expect this. Mr. Speaker, let me just say also that the process in this House that got us here today to debate this resolution was a disgrace, an affront to the way this chamber is supposed to conduct business. In all my time here, I haven't seen a committee minority of either party treated as disrespectfully as Democrats were on Tuesday. That's when the Judiciary Committee considered this resolution of inquiry. Democrats showed up on time. and sat patiently waiting for this hearing to begin. And they waited, and they waited, and they waited. Because the Republican majority gavelled the hearing to order more than an hour after it was supposed to begin. They didn't even have the courtesy to tell the minority about the delay. And things got only worse from there. When the hearing actually got underway, Democrats were cut off at every turn. The Republican majority moved the previous question, cutting off debate and preventing consideration of Democratic amendments. They blocked parliamentary inquiries and a unanimous consent request. Committee Republicans even took the extraordinary step of overruling their chairman after an amendment was ruled out of order. It was heavy-handed and it was undemocratic. My Republican colleagues should be ashamed of the way they conducted themselves. Maybe they are, because the chairman of the committee appeared to hide in the hallway during the vote until he was called by another member. And when he did vote, he voted present. So did the acting chair. Mr. Speaker, were they unwilling to stand up to the more conservative elements of their caucus? Or did they condone what went on? I don't see how anybody in this chamber could endorse such an embarrassing process. It's unfortunate that the majority in the Rules Committee essentially enabled it by using emergency procedures to quickly move this resolution. This is a new low for a majority that has already turned this Congress into the most closed Congress in history. There has already been 89 closed rules this Congress, and it's only June. Not a single open rule under Speaker Ryan, not one. It's fitting that this measure from the Judiciary Committee is being considered under the majority's 90th closed rule, because the Judiciary Committee is now the second most closed committee in this Congress. Mr. Speaker, what does the majority have to show for this bad process? Well, we have another bad product here. This time a partisan measure meant to undermine the Russia investigation. Now, we know this isn't a serious attempt at oversight because the Republican majority apparently doesn't believe in fulfilling its oversight responsibilities to begin with. Republicans have refused, for example, to examine foreign payments to the Trump Organization. They refused to examine extravagant travel by members of the administration. They refused to examine HUD Secretary Carson's $31,000 dining set. I mean, who buys a $31,000 dining set? Where do you find a $31,000 dining set? They refused to investigate the use of private email by administration officials, including Jared Kushner and Stephen Miller, and countless other scandals involving EPA Administrator Pruitt. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. We actually have a long list here, Mr. Speaker, of what should be of what we should be investigating. If my Republican colleagues would like a copy, I'm happy to provide it to them. But suffice it to say that there's no oversight with regard to the misdeeds of this administration. Mr. Speaker, what happened to the Republican zeal for oversight? Former Oversight Committee Chairman FISA subpoenaed the Obama administration more than 100 times in just a 4-year span. I didn't always agree with him on his investigations, but at least the Oversight Committee was performing some oversight. Republicans today are completely missing in action under President Trump. This is an administration that has been embroiled in one scandal after the next. It is an administration dripping with corruption. I mean, this makes the Nixon administration look like common cause. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. Apparently, the Republicans only believe in oversight if it involves President Obama or Secretary Clinton. Let me remind my Republican colleagues that there wasn't a single scandal in President Obama's 8 years in office that implicated him. No cabinet official was forced to resign in scandal. No senior White House official had to leave in the face of wrongdoing. Only with the Trump administration can you have one scandal start at breakfast only to have another one by the time you sit down for dinner. We should be doing our job, getting to the bottom of what's happening and holding people accountable. But instead, we're throwing sand in the gears of the Russia investigation. This is crazy. Now, let me remind everyone of what Special Counsel Mueller's investigation has yielded so far. 20 people and 3 companies have either been indicted or pled guilty. That includes George Papadopoulos, the foreign policy advisor on President Trump's campaign, who pled guilty to making false statements to the FBI. Michael Flynn, the president's former national security advisor, who also pled guilty to making false statements to the FBI. Paul Manafort, his former campaign chairman, was indicted on charges of conspiracy, money laundering, and making false statements. He was later also charged with tax, financial, and bank fraud charges, and he's sitting in jail today. As we have this debate right now, Paul Manafort's in jail. Rick Yates, the president's campaign aide, who was also indicted on similar charges. That's just a small sample based on what we know today. We'll see what else the special counsel's investigation finds. So this goes beyond your basic policy disagreements. This is about whether the minority in this Congress is allowed to do. This is about whether or not the minority in this Congress is allowed to do the job that they were elected to do. Not just this Democratic minority, but any minority. Because we have seen, and we can see again this year, just how quickly powers shift in Congress. And this is about whether this Congress is going to fulfill its oversight responsibilities or sweep possible wrongdoing under the rug. Now, we have a chance today to demand better from this majority. So we should vote against this rule and demand a better process. That's the only way we're going to see a better product. And just one final thing before I reserve my time. I say to my Republican friends, look at what you're doing to this institution. You're destroying it. I mean, not only the closed process, the most closed Congress in the history of our country, but the way you move legislation forward, the way Democrats in the Judiciary Committee were treated on this resolution. In all my years here, I've never seen anything like it. You know, I get it. We have a president who, wants to behave like a king, thinks when he speaks everybody should sit up to attention, just like they do when Kim Jong-un speaks. But this is supposed to be the people's house. And, you are diminishing this institution. This has to stop. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the president. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, at this point in time, the gentleman has his, and the gentleman from Massachusetts and I have discussed many times, and he has his opinion on things and process. I'd have mine as well. We can agree and disagree. But I think the one thing is, let's take a step forward today. This is a process of what we're doing forward. We are wanting and requiring from Article 1 to an Article 2 agency. Let's do that and continue that process. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, as I said at the beginning, there's a whole bunch of troubling things happening in our country today, and the Supreme Court's Janus decision was just yet another very disturbing development that really attacks working men and women. Mr. Speaker, a union's ability to collectively bargain benefits both its members and non-members alike. Unions are responsible for many of the worker protections Americans enjoy today, and they continue to fight for fair pay and good working conditions, including for 17.3 million public employees. We have unions to thank for our weekends, for paid vacations, for overtime pay, for the 8-hour workday, for child labor laws, for pensions, for the minimum wage, for sick leave, for Social Security, for parental leave, for holiday pay, and the list goes on and on and on and on. However, yesterday, the Supreme Court dealt a devastating blow to hardworking employees, the unions that represent them, and the protections they provide us. In a 5-4 ideological decision, the Court invalidated the laws of 22 states and undermined public sector unions. This decision enables free riding by those who benefit from union agreements but do not want to help cover the cost of collective bargaining and enforcement. Unions fight for every single worker. Therefore, every worker should pay their fair share. Mr. Speaker, if we defeat the previous question, I will offer an amendment to the rule to bring up Representative Cartwright's legislation, H.R. 6238, the Public Service Freedom to Negotiate Act. This bill protects the rights of state and local government employees to join unions and collectively bargain. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of my amendment in the record along with extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question. And to discuss our proposal, I yield 5 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Without objection?
Mr. Cartwright.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the ranking member. Mr. Speaker, I represent a district in northeastern Pennsylvania where collective bargaining rights are time-honored and highly valued. The work our unions have done over the past 100+ years has changed our laws and our practices that help create our strong American middle class. Our middle class is something that really makes us the envy of the free world, and American unions keep them strong, keep the middle class strong. Today, public sector unions represent about 17.3 million workers in state and local governments across the country. These public sector workers keep us safe and teach and nurture our children, care for our families. As union members, they are empowered through collective action to fight for fair wages and work conditions, as Mr. McGovern mentioned. But yesterday, in a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court ruled against unions in the case of Janus versus AFSCME. They overturned 4 decades, 40 years of legal precedent to undermine the rights of correctional officers, state and local policemen, firefighters, snowplow drivers, teachers, all of the local government employees that work hard for us and make us safe every day. Court's decision invalidates the laws of 22 states and the District of Columbia. These are states that decided to allow unions and state employees mutually to agree on ensuring that employees pay a fair share fee to cover the costs of collective bargaining and enforcement. This court's decision is nothing but bare-knuckled politics. In fact, prominent Republican politicians have already described it and praised it as a devastating blow to Democrats. It's not jurisprudence, it's just politics. And when you overturn 40 years of American legal precedent, when you rip up 40 years of the fabric of American law, it's a big deal. Associate Justice Kagan described it yesterday as a weaponization of the First Amendment that's been going on, and she's right. This decision comes at a time when hardworking Americans are fighting every day just to pay their bills and support their families. Labor unions are working hard to give workers a collective voice to gain higher wages, better health care, and a secure retirement. And make no mistake, attacks on public sector unions are the camel's nose under the tent flap. They're coming after private sector unions next. Strong public unions build the middle class in our country and shape the life of every American by negotiating for labor rights, including the minimum wage, 8-hour workdays, weekends, employer health insurance. Now is not the time to turn our back on American workers in labor unions. Now is the time to stand with employees who serve the public across the country. And for that reason, if we defeat the previous question, I will offer an amendment to the rule to bring up my bill, H.R. 6238, the Public Service Freedom to Negotiate Act. It's a bill that will defend the right of every public sector employee to join a union and bargain collectively. It empowers the Federal Labor Relations Authority to ensure that state and local government employees are treated fairly and that workplace conditions meet a proper standard. Every employee deserves these basic standards, whether they choose to join a union or not. Again, the Janus decision is an outright attack on all unions, on all working people, and an attack on the causes that we here in Congress, here in the People's House, we fight for every day. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to oppose the previous question and the rule so that this important legislation be considered immediately. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves?
Yes.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Can I inquire from the gentleman how many more speakers he has on his side?
I have no more speakers, and if you're ready to close, I will be as well.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself the remaining time.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, as I said at the outset, there are lots of things that we should be doing oversight on, and that we're not. You know, the Oversight Committee has chosen not to look into all the scandals in this White House. They've chosen instead to look the other way. I mean, I mentioned EPA Administrator Pruitt. I mean, he's demonstrated over and over that he has no regard for taxpayer money. I mean, he's living lifestyles of the rich and famous at EPA. He has no respect for his position and no desire to follow our ethics laws. His many abuses of his position demand that we fully investigate his actions. For example, he spent, I love this, he spent $43,000 on installing a soundproof booth in his office. Like, who does that? GAO stated that he was required to notify Congress before spending more than $5,000 on office improvements, but he goes ahead and spends $43,000 on a soundproof booth, I guess, to make private phone calls. He racked up nearly $200,000 flying first class and on luxury aircraft on taxpayers' dime. One of those trips was to Italy. It cost $30,000. He rented an apartment from an energy lobbyist for $50 a night here in Washington. He enlisted an aide to help his wife find a job. You can't make this stuff up. And, you know, crickets from the Oversight Committee, from my Republican friends in Congress. You know, Congress needs to investigate the alarming drug price trends in this country. This is an emergency, a life or death issue for our constituents. Because of high drug prices, 1 in 4 Americans cannot afford to fill a prescription. These high drug prices are not due to foreign markets, but they're due to our unfair pricing system. We issue patents to drug companies, allowing them to have exclusive rights on drugs. Now, make no mistake, patents are important for incentivizing and rewarding innovation. However, drug companies found ways to game the system by prolonging their patents and continuing their tight hold on life-saving medications. A study by UCLA found that 74% of new patents from 2005 to 2015 went to drugs that already existed. Patents allow these drug companies to charge patients unfair prices without facing competition. That's just unacceptable. But I guess we shouldn't be surprised that there's no investigation, because my Republican friends are working with this White House to undo patient protections in the Affordable Care Act. They're even trying to take away pre-existing condition protections. You know, right now, because of the law, if you have a pre-existing condition, an insurance company cannot discriminate against you and demand that you pay more or not offer you insurance. They have to give you the insurance. They want to take that away. This is unbelievable. We should be investigating this stuff. I could go on and on and on, but we're not doing that. What we're doing is we are bringing a resolution that has been put forward by some who are trying to undermine the Mueller investigation, who do not want the American people to focus on the involvement between Trump operatives and the Russians. You know, it used to be, when I would go up to Massachusetts on the weekends, people would ask me who in the Trump administration met with the Russians. Now the question is, who in the Trump administration didn't meet with the Russians? And what I love about the people who are, testifying before the Mueller committee, and they're now getting in trouble because they're realizing that if you lie, there's a consequence. They all have amnesia. They met with Russian operatives time and time again, and they forget. And then they mysteriously remember when they're confronted with the evidence. I mean, we all should be shocked by this. A foreign adversary interfered in our election. Every single intelligence agency in our government confirms that. And yet you have the President of the United States today tweeting, oh, Russia insists they didn't meddle in our election. I mean, oh my God, can't believe this. The President of the United States is tweeting that today. It's shameful. Stop defending this unacceptable behavior, and stop defending a process that is unacceptable as well. You know, this is being brought up. I mentioned the terrible treatment Democrats received in the Judiciary Committee when this thing was reported out. I mean, I've never seen anything like that in my life. Democrats waited for an hour, and they were just shut out of any opportunity to amend the measure or even speak. Welcome to the United States Congress. This is supposed to be the people's house. This is supposed to be, the shining example of democracy. And you get people who have questions or who have ideas who are shut down in committee. And then we bring it to the floor after going through the Rules Committee last night, and it comes to the floor under a closed process. This is the most closed Congress in history. This is the 90th closed rule. Now, what does that mean? It means that this legislation cannot be amended. There's limited debate. You have to vote for it up or down, my way or the highway. Everybody, Democrats or Republicans, are blocked from offering any of their ideas or any of their potential improvements to this bill. Nothing. This is the 90th closed rule, completely closed rule in this Congress. The 90th bill that has come before us where neither Democrats or Republicans can offer anything. So it is frustrating beyond words to be here today. I mean, the system here is rigged. I mean, this is going to pass on a party line vote, I guess. But this is not the way the People's House should be run. This is disgraceful. And at some point, my Republican friends who care about this institution have to say enough is enough. They have to demand a more open, more transparent system here. This cannot stand. So I urge my colleagues to vote no on the previous question so we can address the terrible impacts of this Supreme Court decision, the Janus case, and vote no on the rule. We should not be doing this today. We should not be engaged in an attempt to try to defend the indefensible or undermine an important investigation into Russia's meddling in our election. And with that, I yield back my time.
That's right. The gentleman yields back. The question is on the order in the Yes, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, we can discuss this and continue to discuss it as we have. I respect my friend from Massachusetts and the opinion and you know, the issues of transparency. I want to see that same transparency. I want to see us work. And I think we have an opportunity to do that. By saying that we bring this rule and this resolution here today to disparage this institution when we're asking for what we are required and can get, I'm not sure how that is. Now, we can discuss other issues you want to investigate and other areas you want to go to, and you can do that, and we can discuss on things, but there's nothing undermining the investigation. The Mueller investigation is still going on. The FBI investigation, all of that is still going on. Nothing is undermining it except the DOJ that has had obvious issues of telling the truth and obvious issues of bias and obvious issues of not giving us the documents we've requested. This is Article 1, Article 2. Now, we can have discussions about everything else, and I know if I was in a position on the other side, I'd want everything investigated, because when you have seen what we have been able to do in the last year and a half with the economy, with jobs, with regulations, with small business, when you start looking at that, I would yell at everything else too, Mr. Speaker, because the President has done what he said he was going to do, and our economy is better, our jobs are better. We're working toward a system in which America is safer. But I would also want to investigate everything else too, because if I was going into a cycle, I would want to throw off and look other places and tell the American people things aren't really right when they know that it is. But also the American people, when I go back home to Georgia, they also want to know is if the Congress asks an agency for documents, why do they not get to produce them? And don't go to the fact, well, it's classified. We've got SCIFs up here. We've got classified areas up here. Don't hide behind the fact. What is problematic here is we're hiding behind the fact of things that look like after they're produced, after they're compelled to produce, it looks like they're trying just to keep it from us to hide embarrassment. And that is not a reason to hide documents. So we have a simple proposal here. Do what you're required to do. Let Congress be the oversight that it's supposed to. And you can discuss whatever else we want to oversight. That's the part of two parties working. But in this one, this is pretty simple. You can vote no and say, nope, Congress shouldn't do that in an area in which we have responsibility and oversight protection. If you want to do that, go right ahead. But again, when you want to throw off everything else in the world, I think it's when you look at the President and you look at the administration and you look at what we've done in the last 18 and a half months, you see a light at the end of the tunnel. You see an economy coming back. You see a good thing for businesses and small business. When people who get up and do not care, Mr. Speaker, what happens on this floor, they really don't. All they want to do is get up in the morning, get their families ready, pay their bills, get a good job, have a possibility of promotion, or go start that business they want to have. We've provided that. Now, up here in the internal workings of government, in the mesh of web that is inside this beltway, when you've got a government agency and government employees who do not want to do what they're supposed to do, it's time for Congress to act, and that's exactly what we're doing today. John Stuart Mill stated, the proper office of a representative assembly is to watch and control the government, to throw light on the publicity of its acts and to compel a full exposition and justification of all of them which anyone considers questionable. Today, Republicans in the House are doing that, Mr. Speaker. We're taking our oversight responsibility seriously. We're abiding by the checks and balances of the Constitution to ensure that the government is acting appropriately to ensure the American people, who, by the way, we represent, have the answers that they deserve, one way or the other. And that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time and move to the previous question.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of a resolution that literally is about this institution. And when we look at this, it's about the Department of Justice and the FBI giving documents to this institution so that they can conduct proper oversight. You know, we have had months and months go by with multiple requests where those requests have been largely ignored by the Department of Justice. And it is time that the American people actually have the transparency that they deserve in being able to see these documents and let them judge for themselves what did or did not go on within the Department of Justice and FBI. Mr. Speaker, Lady Justice should have a blindfold, and that means that justice should not be meted out to those that are well-connected or well-financed. It should be even on all regards. And so, Mr. Speaker, I ask that I get to yield 2 minutes to my good friend, the gentleman from Ohio, to speak on this. No, I can.
The House continues to not be in order. The House will come to order. Please remove your conversations from the floor. That includes the back of the chambers. We'll not continue until it's in order. Thank you for the observation. The gentleman may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding and, more importantly, for this resolution. This is real simple. Real simple. It's about our branch of government, the legislative branch, getting the information we are entitled to get as a separate and equal branch of government to do our constitutional duty of oversight. We have requested information from DOJ. They haven't given to us. We've issued subpoenas. They haven't complied with subpoenas. We have caught them hiding information. They redacted the fact, tried to hide the fact that Peter Strzok, a key player in this, both the Clinton investigation and Russian investigation, was friends with one of the FISA court judges. That was redacted for no other reason than it was embarrassing. And of course, we know that the Deputy Attorney General threatened staff members on the House Intelligence Committee. So this is real simple. Enough is enough. Give us the documents we are entitled to have. Let's have the full weight of the House behind a resolution saying you got 7 days to get your act together. Now, let me just say one other thing. When have you ever seen an agency where the top people who ran the Clinton investigation, the Russian investigation, have had this happen to them? James Comey's been fired. Deputy Director Andy McCabe fired, lied 3 times under oath, faces a criminal referral. Chief of Staff Jim Rabicki has resigned. General Counsel Jim Baker demoted, then left the FBI. Lisa Page, FBI counsel, demoted, then left the FBI. Peter Strzok, deputy head of counterintelligence, demoted and was escorted out of the FBI just days ago. When have you ever seen that happen? And now we know they won't, and they won't give us the information we're asking for. Something's going on over there, and this is a resolution that is needed because it, again, will be the full House of Representatives saying enough is enough. Give us the information so we can do our job and get answers for the American people. And that's why I applaud the gentleman's efforts and support this resolution and encourage every single member of this body as an institution to vote for this resolution. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this so-called resolution of insistence is being rushed to the floor as an emergency measure. There are many emergencies facing the United States at this hour. The subject matter of this resolution is not among them. This resolution is wrong on the facts, wrong on the law, wrong on the rules, and the dangerous precedent to set for the House of Representatives. First, the resolution is riddled with inaccuracies. Taking this document at face value, you might think that the Department of Justice had not already sent us hundreds of thousands of documents, many of which the sponsors of this resolution delight in leaking to the public. It also relies heavily on the March 22nd subpoena issued by Chairman Goodlatte, a subpoena that was not issued in compliance with House rules, and that, according to past House counsels with whom we have consulted, likely cannot be enforced. Second, this resolution is premised on a demand for documents to which Congress is not entitled and which the Justice Department cannot give us. To be clear, I firmly believe that when the House Judiciary Committee asks the Executive Branch for information, our committee is entitled to that information in almost every case. But we are not entitled to information that goes to the core of an ongoing criminal investigation. This prohibition is both a matter of constitutional law, it falls to the executive branch to enforce the law, and a matter of basic fairness. It is wrong to inject politics into criminal proceedings. I suspect that the sponsors of this resolution already know this. They are asking for documents they know they will probably never receive. And they likely view this impossible request as a win-win proposition. If they somehow bully the Department of Justice into turning over materials that go to the core of Special Counsel Mueller's investigation, that information could be and probably would be shared with the subject of the investigation, namely President Trump. Indeed, Mayor Giuliani has hinted exactly that. Based on past precedent, that information would next be shared with anybody watching Fox News. And if they do not pry these documents from the department, they will use that fact to further smear the special counsel, the Deputy Attorney General, and anyone else investigating the president. They have even suggested impeaching the Deputy Attorney General, a proposal that is both without historical precedent and patently ridiculous. The real purpose of this resolution and of this whole attempt is to cast aspersions, is to defame the special prosecutor, the special counsel, and the people associated with him, the Deputy Attorney General. Finally, voting on this resolution today sets a dangerous precedent. The majority will, in effect, have shown the American people that pure politics is more important than the facts and more important than the law. And for what? You can force this fight with the leadership of the Department of Justice. You can demand documents that the department cannot give us and to which we are not entitled. You can attack the character of lifelong public servants like Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein and Special Counsel Mueller. You can burn bridges with your colleagues to speed this resolution to the floor. But you cannot stop the special counsel's investigation. Before members vote today, we must ask, when the special counsel's work is complete, when the enormity of what he has found has been laid bare, how will the American people judge the House's actions here today? I urge my colleagues to oppose this reckless, dangerous measure, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would make one comment. It's interesting when the gentleman opposite, Mr. Speaker, is talking about motives and what is designed by this when we have not had a conversation about that. It's also interesting when we talk about those very motives about an ongoing investigation. Part of this request is asking for 10,000 pages of documents on an investigation that's already complete. I would think we would have the ability to get those from the Department of Justice. But with that, I would recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, for 2 minutes.
The gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman from North Carolina for yielding time to me. You know, an old Arizona farmer told me that when you put up a fence, the cow almost always goes over and leans on the fence, see how strong that fence is, because the cow wants to get to the other side. And if the fence is strong, then it moves away and you don't have that problem. But if your fence is a little bit loose in the wiring, it's going to go over and that cow's going to get on out. And that's what's happened here. What's happened here is we have had a loose fence. We have failed to demand the requirements be met as we've requested. It's not bullying. It's not bullying to request documents. It's not bullying to subpoena and use the right that we have to subpoena. That's not bullying anybody. But I tell you what the problem is. This resolution gets at the heart of it. It says we're going to give you an extra 2 weeks. That's rebuilding the fence a little bit. That's rebuilding that fence a little bit and saying we have oversight authority. You need to comply with that oversight authority. So we're going to rebuild the fence. And I fully support this resolution, Mr. Speaker. But I tell you what, I would enthusiastically support a resolution for contempt because there has not been compliance, nor has there been adequate reason given for noncompliance. And so I support this resolution 100%. I'm going to be voting for it. I've co-sponsored it. But I'll tell you what, we need to be holding a resolution in contempt because this body and its authority has been held in contempt. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his leadership on this particular issue, and with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 3 minutes to the distinguished ranking member of the Crime Subcommittee, the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Let me thank the gentleman for yielding, and certainly let me thank my good friend from North Carolina. I think the nation should understand that we have these stark political differences. We have these stark legal differences, but there's nothing that can undermine the rule of law and the truth. My good friend who just spoke earlier wants to go to the extreme of holding the nation's professional law enforcement officers in contempt for doing their job. I hold in my hand the Office of Inspector General, U.S. Department of Justice, issued in June 2018. Besides these pages, Mr. Speaker, there are eons and eons of documents. Right now in the Judiciary Committee, Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein is there voluntarily. We have Director Wray there, and even if there was a subpoena, they have come. Both of them indicated that they canceled important trips to be here before the United States Congress. I asked in that hearing what was the reason for the emergency hearing, what was the good cause, and I don't know if my colleagues heard it. I could not decipher any good cause of why we are now thrown into this hearing room. And the reason I say that, which speaks to this particular resolution, and that is the fact that we have had now under the presidency of Mr. Trump almost 2 years. And the Judiciary Committee has not answered one single inquiry offered by the Democrats. We have not had one legitimate hearing on the Russian collusion to have violated and made vile the 2016 election. I do not speak to the results. I speak to the impact on the integrity of the election by the American people. We've not had one hearing. Now we are in a rush to continue to reinvestigate the findings of the Inspector General and the investigators who indicated that they investigated this and in essence found no criminal behavior, that this is Secretary Clinton's email. I think it is public knowledge that the item that she was being looked at for was the misuse of classified data. Minimal at best. We don't want that to happen. She did not want it to happen, but she was cleared of any criminal intent or criminal actions by people that we would normally trust. I believe in oversight. I don't want scandals at the Department of Justice. I want the Civil Rights Division to work well. Maybe somebody should ask the question why the Civil Rights Division is understaffed and barely working. Maybe somebody should ask the question why the Trump administration switched from being supportive of anti-voter ID laws that were discriminatory but did not. So this resolution is redundant.
Gentleman's time expired.
It goes in the face of those who
Speaker,
are already...
I grant the gentlelady an additional 30 seconds.
I thank the distinguished gentleman. It goes in the face of those who are already performing. Mr. Speaker, The Department of Justice has already produced about 850,000 documents. The request of this group of folk from Oversight and Judiciary, they are complying. Why are we on the floor taking a hammer to a flea that is unnecessary? Why are we not in the Judiciary Committee probing the individuals who are now appearing? I want the American people to understand this is a resolution that has nothing to do with the crux of protecting the November 18, 2018 elections,
time's expired.
and it has nothing to do with reality. We've finished our work, and we need to go on to protecting the United States of America against bogus elections.
Charlie's time has expired. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reality of this is the very document that the gentlewoman from Texas put up, that 500-page report, is actually investigative conclusions based on 1.2 million documents, of which this body has received less than 24,000 of documents, pages of the same documents that she mentions. And so all we're asking for is for us, the legislative body, and the American people to be able to get the very same documents the Department of Justice has. With that, I would like to recognize the gentleman from Arizona, my good friend, Dr. Gosar, for 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join my colleagues today in insisting that the Department of Justice fully comply with Congress and provide the requested documents, including subpoenas related to the potential FISA abuse. The Department of Justice has done nothing but divert and block Congress from documents that are well within our rights to receive. They have repeatedly insisted they have complied with the document requests when they clearly have not. The Department of Justice Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein has been the major player in stonewalling Congress. The longer they stall this process, the more the American people lose faith in our justice system that is a threat to our country's future. I stand here today calling for transparency, answers, and accountability so that we can get to the truth. The American people deserve the accountability. The time to act is now. If the DOJ fails to comply, then we will be forced to take it to the next level, to hold Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein in contempt, as my previous speaker has spoken, or even to impeach, which would be my preferred course of action right now. It is very simple. Comply with the law, do your job, or get out. I support this resolution, and with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his leadership and tenacious spirit on this, and I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, before I yield further time, I have a parliamentary inquiry.
Gentleman will say his inquiry.
Thank you. HRES 970, which is before us now, includes a reference to a document unilaterally issued by the House Judiciary Committee on March 22, 2018. It is my understanding that the issuance of this purported subpoena is defective because it did not comply with committee rules, providing that, quote, at least 2 business days before issuing any subpoena, the chair shall consult with the ranking member, and the chair shall provide a full copy of the proposed subpoena, close quote. While in this instance the chair did provide me, as ranking member, with a copy of a proposed subpoena on March 19th, the document the chairman issued on March 22nd was substantively and materially different from the document that was shared on March 19th in abrogation of committee rules. My parliamentary inquiry is whether these circumstances would have any bearing on consideration of this resolution, HRES 970, and absent that, whether the defective nature would have any bearing on any future attempts by the House to enforce the supposed subpoena.
The House is currently considering House Resolution 970. The chair cannot separately comment on committee proceedings that is a matter for debate on the resolution.
Could you repeat that last sentence? I couldn't hear.
Certainly. The House is currently considering House Resolution 970. The chair cannot separately comment on committee proceedings that is a matter for debate on the resolution. The gentleman may proceed.
In that case, I would ask unanimous consent to insert in the record a copy of a letter that I sent to the chair dated June 21st, 2018, detailing the facts and background concerning the defective nature of the subpoena purportedly issued on March 22nd.
Without objection.
Thank you. I now yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Tennessee, the ranking member of the Constitution Subcommittee, Mr. Cohen.
3 minutes. Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the ranking member for the time. What we are experiencing here in this moment in this chamber is the greatest tribute to Federico Fellini that could ever be produced in this House. It is a theater of the absurd. It is a ruse on the American people and an attempt to defeat justice that will go back and expose activities involving Russia and participants in the 2016 election that resulted in the election of Donald Trump. The fact is there's a special counsel investigating that. One of the most distinguished Americans ever, a Purple Heart recipient who went in the Marines because one of his friends was killed and volunteered to go to Vietnam, received a Purple Heart and other commendations, and then came back here and didn't practice law and make money and get greedy on Fifth Avenue, but he pursued justice, and he put Gotti away, and he put Noriega away. He's dealt with some of the worst people in this world, and it's a perfect calling for him to stand for the Constitution and for our country and for the rule of law and investigate possible collusion with Russia in our 2016 election and other activities. The campaign manager for President Trump is in jail right now because while out on bond, he did acts that the judge couldn't countenance and couldn't count on him not to engage it again. So she had to put him in jail. There have been indictments, there have been guilty pleas by people close to the president. The president's feeling the heat, and his acolytes here in the House of Representatives, rather than operating as a check and balance on the administration and protecting the flag, the Constitution, and doing their duty and their oath of office, are producing this ruse to make the American public think there's something wrong with our Justice Department, our FBI, and our special counsel. Going after Mr. Mueller, a registered Republican, Mr. Rosenstein, a Republican appointed by Mr. Trump, and Mr. Wray at the FBI, a Republican appointed by Trump. As we're here on this floor, the Judiciary Committee is having a sham hearing with Rosenstein and Wray. Republicans fighting Republicans to get information, because it's not Republicans fighting Republicans, it's Republicans fighting for Trump, who has taken over this party, a party that once proudly stood for people like Ronald Reagan and Dwight Eisenhower and George Bush and George H.W. Bush and even Abraham Lincoln, that most people know was a Republican. What we're seeing is the takeover of our democracy, and this is the theater of the absurd. These documents should not be turned over, and the Justice Department doesn't turn them over because it would reveal sources and it would imperil an investigation. God bless the United States, and may we protect Robert Mueller. I yield back the balance of my time, and I reiterate my oath to defend the Constitution.
Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
I yield 2 minutes to my good friend, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomer.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
My friend, and the very things that my colleagues across the aisle are arguing could have been argued back in Watergate days, and they would have kept Richard Nixon in office. Some of us on this side of the aisle don't care about party as much as we do about justice and the truth. And what we have found is that leading intelligence people and justice people were lying. Clapper's been found to have been a liar, perjured himself, so is Brennan. And then we get more information that has been objected to, redacted, and we find out, whoa, these guys said this was for national security, and it turns out when we get the information, actually, it was because it was embarrassing to the people objecting. Oversight is absolutely critical, and the last administration didn't have enough oversight, and in fact, they obstructed. They were able to drag things out, so we never got to the bottom of things like Fast and Furious when one of our own precious American agents was killed. There were no answers, and they're trying it again. But now we have this obligation to make sure that these documents that have been hidden are brought forward. And yes, we have Mr. Rosenstein, who actually was involved in a Russian investigation of Russia trying to get illegally get U.S. uranium. And he worked with a guy named Mueller, who hired a guy named Weissman to help in that investigation. And they've hidden what went on there and even forced a witness to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Unheard of in that situation. It is imperative that we bring these things out. We have too many people in the Justice Department. I watched one of them named Strzok yesterday, and I can't go into what he said, but I was going, wow, we know that's a lie, what he just said. He's so good at it. And then I realized he must have said straight-faced to his wife 100 times about, oh, no, there's nothing going on with me and Miss Page. There are too many people in the Justice Department that have gotten too good at lying. We need these documents to see what is the truth. Yield back.
I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Georgia, the ranking Democrat on the Intellectual Property Subcommittee, Mr. Johnson. 3 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise in opposition to this resolution, which is a Republican attempt to delay and derail the Mueller investigation. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have today is a Republican president who is under criminal investigation. We have a Republican-led House of Representatives that is doing its best as a cult following for the president to help him thwart the investigation, help him stop the investigation. And so what this is all about today is to pass a resolution that would result in the Justice Department, which is conducting the investigation of the president, to turn over documents that go to the heart of the investigation. Now, why do they want the Department of Justice to turn that documentation over to them? Well, so that it can be leaked to Fox News, get back to the president, and then the president will be in a much better position to do what he does when it comes to being investigated criminally. And what it all adds up to, ladies and gentlemen, is politics trumping justice. You never investigate an investigation that's ongoing. You wait until that investigation is over, then you judge the investigation as to whether or not it was fair. So everything that the Republicans are doing here today is against justice, it's against the rule of law, it's against the Constitution, it's against the America that we all hold dear. This is a stretching, a warping of the power of the legislative branch. They're seeking to use their power to put their heavy thumb and hand on the scale of justice. I heard one of my colleagues say that justice should be blind. And yes, Lady Justice does have a blindfold on so that she cannot see. What these Republicans are trying to do today, ladies and gentlemen, is to remove the blindfold on Lady Justice, to let Lady Justice reveal an injustice, to let this president use Lady Justice as he has used women in the past, to take away the sanctity of this nation. This is hurtful to our nation. I would ask my colleagues on the other side to please think about what you're doing. Expired. And with that, I will yield back.
Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the president. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I might remind the Speaker and all those who are in this chamber today that this is about this very fundamental principle of this institution being able to do oversight. Since when is it not a good idea to have the documents from all agencies brought forth to this body so that the American people can judge for themselves. And with that, I would yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Garrett.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
My thanks to the gentleman from North Carolina. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's one of my great pleasures to educate young people about the United States Constitution. I find myself in an interesting position today because the people that I'm educating aren't that young. One of my colleagues said that we're requesting documents to which we are not entitled. Checks and balances, anyone? We are entitled to whatever we ask for from agencies we established and fund and oversee. Someone also said we're showing that politics is bigger than the law. Mr. Speaker, the Constitution of the United States is the law. This should have never come to this point, that we should need a resolution of the House of Representatives to indicate that an executive branch entity that is funded by, established by, and overseen by this very House of Representatives should be compelled to give to us that to which we are entitled? The next vote is a symptom of a much greater disease. We have a petulant Department of Justice defended by a petulant minority party. Article 1, Section 8, Necessary and Proper Clause. It is the power of the legislature to establish executive entities, to oversee such executive entities, and to fund such executive entities. Mr. Speaker, we just witnessed a vote where 224 people along party lines voted to compel an executive branch entity established and funded by this body to do its job, and 182 along party lines voted against having them be responsive to the checks and balances established in the Constitution of the United States. There shouldn't even need to be a vote. Have the nays not read the Constitution, or do they just not care? We established the DOJ. They refused the oversight like a petulant child by withholding documents. Perhaps the time has come to look at our third responsibility, and that is the money. If President Trump won't compel disclosure, if DOJ won't comply with the instruction of the body that established them and funds them, perhaps it's time to dock this petulant child's allowance. The power of the purse is ours. In a perfect world, DOJ would never face such sanctions. But as the vote that we just witnessed has indicated, we don't live in a perfect world. So as I see it, there are two options. DOJ can do their job and turn over the documents, or I and others of like mind can demand that we begin to stop funding this petulant child who flaunts its ridiculous, unissued power in the face of those who understand the Constitution and the citizens of the United States. It's unconstitutional, it's arrogant, and it's subordinate, and it should stop. And any ruse of legality that's delightfully tap danced on by those who conveniently use the Constitution when it suits and then pervert it when it does not is not the direction this country needs to go if our tomorrows shall be as prosperous as our yesterdays. I yield back.
Reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, I now yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Maryland, the vice-ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Raskin.
The gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. As a member of the Judiciary Committee and a professor of constitutional law, I rise against this uncommonly silly and unprecedented so-called resolution of insistence. We've already received hundreds of thousands of documents from the Department of Justice, and yet now they want to subpoena information relating directly to an ongoing criminal and counterintelligence investigation, which the majority knows full well the Department of Justice cannot and will not release to us. And why are they doing it? Well, presumably it's all to manufacture a constitutional crisis so somebody can get fired over there, so they can impeach Rosenstein, as they're talking about in the Judiciary Committee, or so they can sack the Attorney General, so they can get rid of Mueller or whatever. Do your jobs. Look what's going on in America. We got more than 2,000 kids who are separated from the families by the policy of this administration. Their parents don't know where they are. Let's do our job. Let's reunify those kids with their parents. We saw the Parkland massacre. We saw the Las Vegas massacre. We saw the massacre in San Bernardino County. We've not had one hearing on a universal criminal and mental background check that's desired by 97% of the American people. Not one hearing. And instead, we're caught up in this nonsense because they can't get over Hillary Clinton's emails. Enough. Get over it. Do your jobs. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the gentlemen from Arizona says there's a loose fence in America. There is a loose fence. 15 U.S. intelligence agencies told us in January of 2017 that Russian agents had engaged in active measure campaigns to undermine the American election. They had a propaganda campaign to put poison on the internet through Facebook and through other social media. They directly conducted a campaign of cyber espionage and sabotage against the Democratic National Committee, and they tried to break into our election systems in more than 20 states. And what have they done with the loose fence? Nothing. They've helped to open the gate. That's what we should be talking about today, not this ludicrous, absurd resolution. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask the Speaker if he would remind others that are in this well that if they're real concerned about family reunification, I have a bill, and the gentleman opposite is certainly welcome to come in and co-sponsor that bill to reunify those, Mr. Speaker. And with that, I would like to recognize my good friend, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith, for 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman, Mr. Speaker, and appreciate the time. I would say that that is a good bill, and I am glad to have been an original co-sponsor with the gentleman from North Carolina on the bill related to making sure that families are not separated. Now, the previous gentleman also said, do our jobs. It's curious because, as I understand it, part of our job is to make sure that we are overseeing the federal government. Our founding fathers created something that had never been created before, a checks and balance system. There was supposed to be a natural tension between the various branches. And Congress is supposed to be an equal branch with the power of oversight over the administrative branch to make sure that they are following the laws and to make sure that they are meting out justice even-handedly. That's what this resolution is about. But Congress too often sits back and does not do anything. It just says, oh, well, we can't get that information. We're so sorry. This resolution points out we have been patiently waiting for some of these documents for years, for months, for weeks, for the administrative branch of government to respond to its co-equal branch, the United States Congress. And they have refused to do so. And I would submit that this is a very measured resolution, that it does not immediately call for holding somebody in contempt or holding somebody to find that somebody should be impeached. It says instead, here's the deadline. What we're trying to seek here are the facts. If you're afraid of the facts, then yeah, you stand up on the floor and you rail about all kinds of other issues. But the facts, the truth, needs to come out for the American people. And so I would submit that this resolution is very reasonable and ought to be passed, because if there is not a response, it is our duty to hold those who do not respond properly in contempt. An additional 15 seconds.
The gentleman has another 30 seconds.
The gentleman is recognized for an additional 30 seconds.
It is our duty to find and to hold as this Congress those people who do not respond in contempt, and then to take their persons into possession and have them explain to a judge how it is they plan to purge themselves of that contempt. It is reasonable that we give them notice before such action is taken. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from North Carolina reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 4 minutes to the distinguished ranking member of the Intelligence Committee, the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 4 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to this resolution. If this was oversight, I would be in strong support of any effort to seek production, but it is not. This is not oversight. It is collaboration with the executive masquerading as oversight. Or if this is oversight, it is oversight of the most obsequious kind. It is oversight in the nature of how may we serve you, dear President. It is oversight that asks, what is your will, dear President? Oversight that says, we are not worthy, dear President. It is oversight that says, we shall seek, but you shall find, Mr. President, because what we obtain, we shall provide to your legal defense team, or we shall selectively leak or misrepresent in your service. It is oversight in the nature of not desiring an outcome, not desiring the production of documents, but rather the production of a fight, the production of a pretext to give the dear President a pretext to fire Rod Rosenstein or Bob Mueller. I have served on the Intelligence Committee now for almost a decade. And while I cannot disclose the number of FISA applications during the course of those 10 years, I can tell you the number of times that my Republican colleagues have sought the underlying investigatory materials behind a specific FISA application, and that number is 1. That case is this case, and that case just happens to implicate our dear President. It is not that there are no areas that call out for oversight right now. There are too many to count. Why is it that after sanctioning ZTE for violating Iran sanctions and violating North Korea sanctions, the President abruptly changed course out of an ostensible concern for Chinese jobs? Is it because the Chinese invested $500 million in a Trump-branded property? That is worthy of oversight. Is the First Family seeking to do business with Gulf or other allies while making U.S. policy? Is U.S. policy for sale? That is worthy of oversight. Is the President seeking to raise postal rates on Amazon to punish the Washington Post and suppress the freedom of press? That is worthy of oversight. But none of this is oversight. Speaker Boehner recently said that the Republican Party was off taking a nap somewhere. If that is so, then despite the best efforts of our capable ranking member Elijah Cummings, the Government Reform Committee that should be doing this oversight is in the midst of the deepest slumber. Wake up, my colleagues, and do your jobs. Wake up and end this duplicit attack on the Department of Justice and the FBI and our special counsel, because this is surely not oversight. It is not what oversight looks like, but it is what an attack on the rule of law looks like. It is what happens when we whittle away our democracy one piece by terrible piece. When this chapter of our history is written, it will condemn the actions of a president who little understands or respects the institutions of our democracy. But it will reserve some of the harshest criticism for this Congress that enabled him. This Congress that knew its responsibility but failed to live up to it. Wake up, Republican Party. Wake up, my colleagues. The country needs you. May I have an additional 30 seconds?
I grant the gentleman an additional minute.
I thank the gentleman.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 additional minute.
Wake up, my colleagues. True oversight, when the President occupies the same party as the majority in Congress, requires that majority to put country over party. It is incompatible with the corrupting principle of party over everything else. Wake up, my colleagues, and do your jobs. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to do our job. And the gentleman opposite makes an eloquent speech about doing our job of proper oversight. I can tell you I've served on the Oversight Committee for 6 years. And in that 6 years, not only have we been tenacious in getting documents, but we've also had a responsive dialogue back and forth with many in the executive branch. You know, at what point do you do oversight if you can't get the very documents that we request? You know, my friends opposite many times will talk about getting documents when it serves a particular political purpose that they want to espouse. And yet, when we're talking about the fundamentals of this country, Lady Justice and meting out justice without any favoritism Indeed, that's why we need the documents. That's why we're trying to do our job, and that's why this resolution is so critical. And with that, I will recognize the gentleman from Georgia, my good friend, Mr. Heiss, for 3 minutes.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I deeply appreciate my good friend from North Carolina for affording this opportunity to speak. I find it interesting that when those from the other side have an empty argument, their answer is to yell loud and to rail on issues that are unrelated to that which we are currently discussing. Mr. Speaker, our founders made it very clear when they drafted the Constitution that we have a system of government that keeps each branch accountable to the Constitution and the rule of law. For nearly 18 months now, the Department of Justice has attempted to shield itself from the legislative branch. Our duty to conduct oversight. That is and ought to be both alarming, and it is absolutely unacceptable. Mr. Speaker, we know clearly from the IG report here recently, text after text, email after email, that there were a number of FBI agents who were extremely biased against the Trump administration, the Trump candidacy, and in favor of Hillary Clinton. We know that bias existed. We also know that many of them were willing to use their position, their status, to try to influence the election. These are things that we know. And we as a legislative body have not only the responsibility to do oversight, but we've got to have the information in order to do that oversight. And that's what this resolution is all about. I think it's important for all of us to come back to the understanding, the realization that oversight is necessary to prevent corruption. That's what this is all about. The American people, not just the members of Congress, we have the right to get answers to the questions that are before us. This is all for the purpose of preventing corruption that may exist and to prevent it from going further. This resolution is a clear message to the Department of Justice that the U.S. House of Representatives, we are determined to get the documents that have been requested. Even a single page from these missing documents could be critical to the overall congressional investigation that's underway. It's all necessary. There are irrefutable facts, Mr. Speaker. The Department of Justice is accountable to Congress. Another fact, they are hiding documents. They are refusing to cooperate. We have even beyond that now the chilling reports that the Deputy Attorney General personally threatened staff members on the Intel Committee. This is unacceptable. So under this resolution, the full force of the House is being brought to light. Mr. Speaker, we've got to get to the bottom of this. I thank the gentleman.
Time has expired. The gentleman from North Carolina reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished Democratic Leader of the House, Ms. Pelosi.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding. I thank him for his extraordinary leadership in articulating what is right, what honors our oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, the separation of power contained therein, and the integrity of our judicial system. I also thank our distinguished ranking member of the Intelligence Committee, Mr. Schiff, for his leadership, his courage, and his beautiful and inspirational statement this morning, full of fact, but also full of values. Mr. Speaker, I rise today not only as leader, but also as one who has served on the Intelligence Committee as a member, as a ranking member, and as an ex officio since the early 90s. And I can say, while I've seen a lot in that time, I have never seen anything that has stooped so low on the part of the Republicans as what they are doing today. It is just, it's as if they've said, you take an oath of office to the Constitution, we took an oath of office to Donald Trump. It's shocking. And if many of them are lawyers, I don't know how they justify or reconcile that. And so it is with great dismay that I see this them doing violence to this body, to this Constitution, to this judicial system, judiciary system, and to this country. They are so curious about prying in to a legal case, but they don't have the faintest interest in looking into what the Russians did to disrupt our elections. Not one hearing, nothing, no oversight, nothing. Why is that? Why is that? And now they're saying they have a right to know this, that, and the other thing. They have no right to do that. So I'm going to not take up any more time. I've said my piece on this, but I do want to acknowledge that Mr. Schumer and I, as well as Mr. Schiff and Senator Warner, the ranking member on the Senate side, sent a letter to Honorable Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, and to Christopher Wray, the the Director of the FBI, saying to them, please, please do not yield on any of this. Your role in preserving the integrity and most importantly, our justice system has become ever more vital. I yield back my time. First of all, I urge a no vote, and I hope that some Republicans will do what is right and urge a no vote on this. This is taking us into very dangerous territory. If the Democrats were in power, I would say the same thing. We wouldn't want to have this access. You shouldn't have this access. This is wrong. Again, if you're honoring your salute and your oath of office to Donald Trump, vote yes. If you're honoring your oath of office to the Constitution of the United States, vote no. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, obviously the gentlewoman from California lays out an unbelievable claim that this is the lowest of low that's ever been seen in this body. I find that just remarkable that that statement could even be made. The other issue is we're not asking for any special counsel documents. We're not asking for sources and methods. We're asking for the documents that we have a right as this body to see. Transparency is a good thing, Mr. Speaker. Transparency is what the American people deserve. And when we're talking about what it will do and what it will not do, yes, when we get these documents, we believe that it will do away with this whole fiasco of what they call the Russian-Trump collusion, because there wasn't any. Mr. Speaker, I am glad to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, my good friend, Mr. Davidson.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will applaud former Speaker Pelosi for her consistency. She seems to have uniformly supported the executive branch ignoring subpoenas, perhaps destroying evidence and failing to comply with the rule of the House, with the subpoena being issued by the House, with the important precedent of the Constitution. So this really isn't about the Russia investigation or about the specifics of this case. And so frankly, I find it appalling that Attorney General Sessions would ignore these activities in the Department of Justice. The reality is this is a question of, shall the executive branch comply with a subpoena from the legislative branch? The contents, we don't know what the contents are because they're redacted, they're being withheld. This has gone on for a long time, and if we are to keep our republic, the principle has to be resolved to where the legislative branch, being co-equal, shall have access to this information. And not just a privileged few, not just a few that keep it withheld from the rest of the body, the whole body. Since last year, the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence has investigated potential abuses of the FISA system, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act by the Department of Justice, and our intelligence community. Previously, our colleague, Mr. Schiff, was a strong supporter for FISA reform and proposed numerous bills. So that's where our colleagues on the other side of the aisle are not consistent. FISA has been abused, and we've seen one of the most blatant examples of that with the activities and things that have already been made public, which has led to this line of inquiry. Americans should be concerned that the federal government may abuse its capacity to gather foreign intelligence by spying on our fellow Americans. Without serious reforms to FISA, the Fourth Amendment will exist as nothing more than a distant memory or a notation with an asterisk, except in these cases. The resolution insists that the Department of Justice fully comply with requests, including subpoenas, of the House Intelligence and Judiciary Committees relating to potential violations of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Unless we support and defend our Constitution, we will not keep our republic. We will further embolden and empower the executive branch, and we will weaken our country. This bill will help reform FISA, help defend our Constitution. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from North Carolina reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm prepared to close if the other side is.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not going to repeat where's the beginning of it? Oh. What I said before, but I will summarize. The request being made here is for information that the Department of Justice cannot provide because it relates to an ongoing criminal investigation and because some of it would identify informants. The motive is probably simply to politically embarrass the department and provide a means of embarrassing and defaming the special prosecutor and the people associated with him in the department. I will read from a letter that the Deputy Attorney General sent to Senator Grassley and to the Speaker of the House yesterday. He quotes the following, quote, "Throughout American history, wise legislators have worked with department officials to limit oversight requests in order to respect the department's duty to protect national security, preserve personal privacy, and insulate investigations from the appearance of interference. For instance, the department sent a letter to a House committee chair in 2000 describing the department's policies on responding to congressional oversight requests. The letter explains, and I'm now quoting from the 2000 letter, such inquiries inescapably create the risk that the public and the courts will perceive undue political and congressional influence over law enforcement and litigation decisions. Such inquiries also often seek records and other information that our responsibilities for these matters preclude us from disclosing." It's the end of the quote from the 2000 letter. The letter quotes President Ronald Reagan, who wrote that, quote, "A tradition of accommodation should continue as the primary means of resolving conflicts between the branches," close quote. Regardless of whether an interbranch information request is made by letter or subpoena, the relationship between the branches gives rise to, quote, "an implicit constitutional mandate to reach an accommodation short of full-scale confrontation," close quote from President Reagan. It must not be the case that the department is required to risk damage to reputations, put cases and lives at risk, and invite political interference by opening sensitive files to congressional staff without restriction, close quote from the letter from Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein. That's exactly what these requests would do. They would risk damage to reputations, put cases and lives at risk. Already two informants have had their identities outed, and invite political interference by opening sensitive files to congressional staff without restriction. We ought to let the special prosecutor, the special counsel, complete his work without hindrance. We ought to see whatever the special counsel finds, react to it as appropriate, perhaps hold hearings into the findings when we see that. All we know about the special counsel so far, unlike all the allegations against him in his investigation, it's a witch hunt, it's this and it's that, all we really know is that there are 20 indictments, 5 guilty pleas, and we know what he's pleaded in court. There have been no leaks. So you can't really say anything about the investigation other than, in this time period, they've already gotten 20 indictments, 5 guilty pleas, including from some of the closest people to the president in his administration and in his campaign. We'll see where it goes from there. These requests are an attempt, I should say, to sabotage the investigation, and we should not go along with it. I reserve the balance of my time.
Of his time, the gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Zeldin.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong support of HRES 970. I'd like to thank my colleagues, Congressman Mark Meadows and Jim Jordan. First off, from my conversations with members of the Justice Department, I have been very impressed with their feedback of saying just how high morale has gone over the course of the last year and a half because they're able to do their jobs again. You were seeing prosecution numbers and certain metrics in these different U.S. attorney offices going down. Their hands were being tied behind their back. We've talked about the military having their hands tied behind their back with rules of engagement. We saw our Justice Department, our U.S. attorneys, our FBI with their hands tied behind their backs, and their morale is going up. Now, I'm not going to subscribe to those in this chamber and in this country who want to resist, oppose, obstruct, impeach this president on everything and anything. That is their top priority in life. That's not mine. My priority is when I see that there's misconduct at the highest levels of the Department of Justice and FBI, I, as a member of Congress, taking my oath seriously to my own constituents and to this country, I demand answers. It's about transparency and it's about accountability. I have a 12-page resolution that we introduced, House Resolution 907. It's up to 33 co-sponsors. What's interesting about this resolution is 12 pages outlining and detailing all this misconduct, calling for a second special counsel. Not one person has been able to poke any hole in a single bullet in this entire 12-page document. Well, I have a problem with it when those in the Justice Department say that they can't provide a document because it risks national security. You read the document, you find nothing in there risks national security. And actually what the problem was is that it might cause embarrassment to someone in the DOJ and FBI. That's why it wasn't provided. I don't like it when you see FISA abuse that results in a United States citizen being spied on, going to a secret court with secret documents to get a warrant without due process and providing the full story. It's all about justice, transparency, accountability. Mark Meadows has been leading the fight to get more documents. I support him with it. The Justice Department needs to comply. We have an oversight function, and I do not subscribe to those in this chamber who want to oppose, obstruct, resist, impeach. That is not the path forward for America. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from North Carolina reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I think I've made the case clear. I think Mr. Zeldin has added nothing to the debate that I have to refute. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman opposite for his impassioned arguments and debate on this issue. I thank all of those who have come down to the floor today to stand up for this institution's right to provide proper oversight and conduct it according to the Constitution. But more importantly, for good transparency. Transparency is a good thing, and I think it is high time that we do it. For 8 months, Mr. Speaker, we have made a request of the Department of Justice. They have not fully complied. On March the 22nd, 99 days ago, we sent a subpoena giving them 14 days. They did not comply. 2 weeks ago, the Speaker of the House actually reached out and said, you have another week. They did not comply. This is our last attempt to give them the benefit of the doubt that they have nothing to hide. They need to start acting like it, Mr. Speaker, and with that, I yield back the balance of my time, and I encourage a yes vote.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. All time for debate has expired.